They thought I'd cry quietly in my corner, accept their judgment like I always had. My own sister, my only sister, told me I wasn't socially fit for her wedding. Those were her exact words, not mine. My parents agreed. My entire family decided I was too much of an embarrassment to witness Lauren's perfect day. But they don't know what I've been planning. They have no idea that their precious golden child's wedding is about to become the most unforgettable disaster of their lives. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. My name is Madeline Carter, and I've spent 29 years believing I was part of a family. That illusion shattered at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Sitting in my cramped cubicle at the Arlington Research Institute, surrounded by towers of dusty files and the perpetual hum of fluorescent lights. The text message came from Lauren, my younger sister by 3 years, the golden child, the perfect daughter who could do no wrong in our parents' diplomatic circles. I expected wedding details, maybe a bridesmaid dress fitting or venue confirmation. Instead, I got a knife straight through the heart. Maddie, I've been thinking about the wedding guest list, and honestly, I don't think you should come. You're just not socially fit for this kind of event. My future in-laws are very important people, lawyers, politicians, business leaders. I can't risk you embarrassing us. I hope you understand. I read it 3 times before the words actually penetrated. Not socially fit, embarrassing. I hope you understand. My hands started trembling, making the phone shake as I stared at those clinical, cutting words. Around me, the Research Institute continued its mundane rhythm, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, my coworker Janet discussing her weekend plans with someone in the next cubicle, normal life proceeding while mine imploded. Lauren was marrying Richard Wellington III, heir to a Chicago law firm fortune. Their engagement had been splashed across the society pages of every newspaper from Illinois to D.C. Rising legal star marries ambassador's daughter. The headlines had read, "Our parents had been practically glowing with pride for months." And now I wasn't even invited to witness it. I tried calling her immediately, my fingers fumbling with the screen. It went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. Lauren never answered calls when she might have to deal with confrontation. "Hi, this is Lauren. I'm probably planning something fabulous, so leave a message and I'll get back to you when I can." The same cheerful, slightly breathless voice that had been charming everyone since we were children. The same voice that had just told me I was too shameful to attend her wedding. My throat felt raw as I left a message. "Lauren, it's me. I got your text. Please call me back. We need to talk about this." But even as I said it, I knew she wouldn't call. Lauren had made her decision, delivered it with surgical precision, and now she'd move on to more important things like choosing between platinum and white gold for her reception centerpieces. I sat in that fluorescent-lit cubicle for another hour, pretending to organize research files while my mind reeled. The Arlington Research Institute wasn't glamorous. I spent my days cataloging historical documents and maintaining archives for various academic studies. It was quiet work, detail-oriented work, work that suited someone who preferred books to people and facts to small talk. But it was honest work. I took pride in my meticulous organization, my ability to find obscure documents that researchers desperately needed. I wasn't changing the world, but I wasn't hurting anyone either. Apparently, that wasn't enough for my family. My parents, James and Victoria Carter, had spent their careers in diplomatic service. Dad had been an ambassador to 3 different countries. Mom had hosted countless state dinners and charity galas. They moved through Washington, D.C.'s elite circles with practiced ease, always perfectly dressed, always saying exactly the right thing to exactly the right people. Lauren had inherited their social grace effortlessly. Even as a teenager, she could work a room full of adults, remembering names and making connections that would serve her for years. She'd studied international relations at Georgetown, interned at the State Department, and somehow landed a position at Richard's law firm that seemed tailor-made for her particular blend of intelligence and charm. I, on the other hand, had always been the awkward one. the quiet one who stammered through dinner party introductions and forgot important people's names, the one who preferred reading in my room to mingling at embassy functions, the one who chose a small college in Virginia over prestigious universities, who picked a practical major over something that would impress at cocktail parties. The disappointment. By 5:30 p.m., I'd made my decision. I gathered my things, told Janet I wasn't feeling well, and drove home to my small apartment in Arlington. It was nothing like the elegant townhouse where I'd grown up, nothing like the penthouse Lauren shared with Richard in Chicago, but it was mine, and it was honest. And until today, I'd thought that was enough. I poured myself a glass of wine cheap red from a bottle that had been sitting on my counter for weeks and read Lauren's message again. Not socially fit. As if social fitness was something measurable, something I'd failed a test for. As if 29 years of being part of this family meant nothing when weighed against the possibility that I might use the wrong fork or say something awkward to a federal judge. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just hurt angry. Lauren wasn't protecting her precious event from some unstable relative. She was protecting her image from the sister who reminded everyone that the Carter family wasn't quite as perfect as they pretended to be. I was the flaw in their pristine facade, and Lauren had decided I needed to be edited out. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and started researching my sister's perfect wedding. If I wasn't good enough to attend, I was damn well going to know everything about what I was missing. And maybe, just maybe, I was going to find a way to make sure Lauren's perfect day wasn't quite as perfect as she imagined. That night, staring at my laptop screen, memories flooded back with painful clarity. Lauren and I hadn't always been enemies. There was a time, when we were very young, when she'd crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and I'd read her stories until she fell asleep. But somewhere along the way, our family dynamic had crystallized into something much more toxic. I remembered being 7 years old at one of Mom's charity luncheons. The other wives had brought their daughters' little girls in frilly dresses who knew how to curtsy and make polite conversation. Lauren, only 4 at the time, had charmed everyone effortlessly. She'd sung a nursery rhyme when asked, accepted compliments with perfect grace, and even helped serve cookies to the other children. I'd spilled grape juice on my white dress and spent the rest of the afternoon hiding in the bathroom, too mortified to face the stares and whispered comments. Madeline is just going through a shy phase, Mom had explained to the other women, her voice carrying that particular strain of forced cheerfulness that meant she was deeply embarrassed. Lauren's always been our little social butterfly. Even then, at 7, I'd understood the subtext. Lauren was the success. I was the phase that needed to be outgrown. The pattern only intensified as we got older. At embassy functions, Lauren would glide between conversations while I stood awkwardly by the refreshment table, nursing a single glass of punch and counting the minutes until we could leave. During family dinners with important guests, Lauren would ask thoughtful questions about policy and international relations, while I struggled to think of anything to say beyond, "Please pass the salt." High school had been particularly brutal. Lauren was homecoming queen, debate team captain, and valedictorian. She dated the student body president and got early admission to Georgetown. I was the girl who ate lunch in the library and whose biggest achievement was perfect attendance. "We're so proud of both our daughters," Dad would tell his colleagues, but even as a teenager I could hear the hollow ring in his voice when his eyes landed on me. They were proud of Lauren. I was just the unfortunate package deal. The worst part wasn't the constant comparisons, it was how Lauren learned to weaponize them. She'd developed an almost surgical precision in highlighting my shortcomings, always with a smile, always with plausible deniability. "Oh, Maddie, you wore that dress to the last 3 events," she'd say sweetly in front of Mom's friends. "Don't you have anything newer?" "Madeline's so smart about books and things," she'd tell her boyfriend's parents at dinner. "She's just not really a people person, you know." "I wish I could be more like my sister," she'd sigh dramatically to anyone who'd listen. "She doesn't care what people think of her at all. I'm so jealous of that confidence." Each comment was perfectly crafted to sound loving and supportive while actually highlighting exactly what was wrong with me. Too poor to afford new clothes, too awkward for social situations, too weird to care about normal things. And our parents not only allowed it, they encouraged it. Lauren's little digs were reframed as honest observations or sisterly concern. When I tried to defend myself, I was being oversensitive or taking things the wrong way. By the time I left for college, I'd internalized their assessment completely. I was the broken Carter daughter, the one who couldn't quite measure up, the family embarrassment who needed to be managed and contained. I chose a small liberal arts school 3 hours away, far enough to breathe, close enough that they couldn't accuse me of abandoning the family entirely. I studied library science, picked a career path that would keep me safely away from their spotlight. I dated occasionally, but never brought anyone home, knowing they'd be subjected to Lauren's subtle interrogation and found wanting. The saddest part was how grateful I'd been for any scraps of inclusion they threw my way. When Lauren got engaged and asked me to be a bridesmaid, I'd actually cried with happiness. Finally, I thought. Finally. I was going to be part of something important in their lives. I should have known better. The engagement party had been a preview of what was coming, held at the country club where our parents were members. It was full of Washington's power players and Chicago's legal elite. I'd spent weeks finding the perfect dress, practiced small talk in the mirror, and arrived determined to prove I could handle their world. Within 30 minutes, I'd committed 3 social sins. I'd introduced myself to someone who'd expected me to recognize him from the news. I'd asked Lauren's future mother-in-law if she worked. She was a philanthropist, not employed. And I'd mentioned my job at the Research Institute to a group that clearly considered it beneath their notice. Lauren had swooped in each time, smoothing over my mistakes with practiced grace. "Madeline's been so busy with her important archival work," she'd say with that special smile that meant, "Please excuse my socially inept sister. She doesn't follow politics as closely as the rest of us." I'd spent the rest of the evening nursing a single glass of wine in the corner, watching Lauren work the room like the accomplished performer she was. Every laugh she generated, every connection she made, felt like proof of what I could never be. "How was that for you?" she'd asked me afterward, as we waited for our cars. "It was lovely," I'd lied, because that's what she wanted to hear. "Good," she'd said, but her eyes had been calculating. "Richard's family is really particular about image. You know, they've been in Chicago society for generations. Everything has to be perfect for the wedding." Even then, I'd missed the warning. I'd been so pathetically grateful to be included that I'd ignored all the signs that my inclusion was temporary, conditional, and ultimately disposable. Now, sitting in my apartment with Lauren's rejection text still burning in my memory, I finally understood what I should have seen years ago. I wasn't Lauren's sister in any meaningful sense. I was a problem to be managed, a flaw to be hidden, a source of potential embarrassment to be eliminated when the stakes got high enough. Well, if that's what they wanted, I was happy to oblige. But not in the way they expected. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day pacing my apartment, Lauren's text message replaying in my mind like a broken record. By noon, I'd convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, my parents didn't know about Lauren's decision. Maybe she'd acted unilaterally, in one of her impulsive moments, and Mom and Dad would be horrified when they found out. I called Dad first. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that practiced diplomatic warmth he used with everyone from foreign dignitaries to telemarketers. "Madeline, sweetheart, how are you?" "I'm confused. Actually, I got a text from Lauren yesterday about the wedding." The pause that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. In that silence, I heard everything I needed to know. His voice had shifted, becoming more careful. "Yes, she mentioned she'd spoken with you." Spoken with me, as if her text message had been a conversation instead of a unilateral declaration. "Dad, she uninvited me. She said I'm not socially fit for her wedding." Another pause. Madeline, you have to understand the position Lauren's in. Richard's family is very prominent in Chicago society. The guest list is, well, it's quite exclusive. There will be media coverage, political figures, business leaders. I'm her sister. Of course you are, and we love you dearly. But sometimes love means making difficult decisions for the good of the family. Lauren's marriage is incredibly important not just for her, but for all of us. The connections, the opportunities. So you knew? You knew she was going to uninvite me? We discussed it as a family, yes. The words hit me like a physical blow. They'd discussed it. All three of them had sat around, probably over one of Mom's perfectly prepared dinners, and decided that I was too much of a liability to attend my own sister's wedding. I see. My voice sounded hollow, even to my own ears. Sweetheart, please don't take this personally. It's just one day. After the wedding, things will go back to normal. Normal. As if there was anything normal about being rejected by your entire family. Is Mom there? She's at her book club, but I'm sure she'd tell you the same thing. We all agreed this is for the best. After I hung up, I sat on my couch for a full hour, staring at the wall and trying to process what had just happened. My father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework, had just confirmed that the family had unanimously voted me out of the most important day of Lauren's life. When I finally worked up the courage to call Mom, I got her voicemail, but she called back within 20 minutes, probably after Dad warned her I'd been asking questions. Darling, I heard you spoke with your father. Mom's voice had that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news with maximum gentleness, like a surgeon explaining that the amputation was necessary to save the patient. Mom, please tell me you don't agree with this. Oh, sweetheart, you know how much I love you, but we have to think about what's best for Lauren's future. This wedding isn't just a celebration, it's a business merger, a political alliance. Richard's father sits on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. His mother chairs the most influential charity foundation in Chicago. And I'm too embarrassing to be in the same room with them. You're not embarrassing. You're just different. You have your own wonderful qualities, but social events like this aren't your strength. Remember the engagement party. You seemed so uncomfortable. Of course she'd bring up the engagement party. My 45 minutes of social awkwardness were now being used as evidence that I was fundamentally unsuitable for family functions. I tried my best that night. I know you did, darling, but trying isn't always enough, is it? Sometimes we have to be realistic about our limitations. Our limitations. She was talking about my social anxiety like it was a disability that disqualified me from basic family membership. Mom, she's my sister, my only sister. And she'll still be your sister after the wedding. This is just one day. Madeline, one day that's incredibly important for her future. Surely you can be generous enough to give her that. Generous. They were framing my exclusion as an act of generosity on my part, as if I were nobly sacrificing myself for Lauren's greater good. What if I promised to stay in the background? I could sit in the back, not talk to anyone important. Sweetheart, please don't make this harder than it already is. The decision has been made. The decision has been made, not we made a decision or Lauren made a decision, but the passive voice that removed all agency, all responsibility, as if my exclusion were an act of nature rather than a choice made by people who claimed to love me. After that call ended, I did something I hadn't done since I was a child. I called my grandmother. Dad's mother had died when I was 12, but Mom's mother, Grandma Rose, was still alive at 86, living in a retirement community in Florida. Maddie, what a lovely surprise. I was just thinking about you girls. Her voice was warm and genuine in a way that made my throat tight with unexpected emotion. Grandma, did you know about Lauren's wedding? Of course, dear. I'm so excited to see you both all dressed up. Your mother sent me pictures of the bridesmaid dresses. They're going to be beautiful on you. The confusion in her voice was genuine. They hadn't told her. Of course they hadn't. Even my parents knew that Grandma Rose would be appalled by their decision. Actually, Grandma, I'm not going to be in the wedding anymore. Why not? Are you sick? No, Lauren decided I'm not appropriate for the guest list. The silence that followed was different from the careful pauses I'd gotten from my parents. This was the silence of genuine shock. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You're her sister. I know. What do your parents say about this? They agree with her. They what? Grandma Rose's voice had shifted from confused to outraged. Victoria and James are letting this happen. They say it's for the best, for Lauren's future. That's absolute nonsense. I'm calling your mother right now. Grandma, please don't. It won't change anything, and it'll just make things worse for me. But I could hear her muttering under her breath, and I knew she was already planning her attack strategy. Grandma Rose had been fighting family battles for 8 decades, and she didn't back down easily. After I hung up with her, I felt simultaneously better and worse. Better because at least one person in my family thought my exclusion was wrong. Worse because it confirmed that my parents and Lauren had made a conscious choice to hurt me, despite knowing how wrong it was. That evening, I sat in my living room and stared at the small gift box on my coffee table. Inside was the bridesmaid's necklace Lauren had given me when she'd asked me to be in her wedding party, a delicate silver chain with a small pearl pendant. Something to remember this special time, she'd said, hugging me tight. I picked up the box and hurled it against the wall as hard as I could. It shattered on impact, the necklace spilling onto the floor in a tangle of broken chain and scattered pearls. For the first time since receiving Lauren's text, I wasn't sad. I wasn't hurt. I was furious. They wanted to protect Lauren's perfect day from the embarrassment of my presence. They wanted to treat me like a shameful family secret that needed to be hidden away. Fine. But if they thought I was going to disappear quietly and let them pretend I never existed, they were about to learn just how wrong they could be. I wasn't going to be the family victim anymore. I was going to be their worst nightmare. And Lauren's perfect wedding was going to be the perfect place to start. The transformation from victim to strategist happened overnight, by Thursday morning. I'd called in sick to work again and was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, a legal pad, and a determination I'd never felt before. If my family wanted to play games, I was going to learn the rules and then break them spectacularly. First, I needed intelligence. Lauren had always been careless with her social media privacy settings, treating Instagram and Facebook like public billboards for her perfect life. Within an hour, I had screenshots of everything: venue details, vendor information, guest lists she'd posted about, even complaints about difficult family dynamics that made my blood boil. Rosecliff Manor. That's where they were holding the reception, a sprawling estate in Lake Forest, Illinois, about an hour north of Chicago. The kind of place that charged $50,000 just for the privilege of walking through their doors. Lauren had posted dozens of photos from her venue tours, gushing about the fairy tale ballroom and gorgeous gardens perfect for photos. I found the Manor's website and spent another hour studying floor plans, vendor requirements, and booking policies. They prided themselves on exclusive, intimate celebrations for discerning clients. Perfect. The more exclusive and intimate, the bigger the splash when things went wrong. But I needed help, not just emotional support, tactical assistance, and I knew exactly who to call. Harper Williams had been my roommate in college and remained my closest friend, despite living 3 states away in Atlanta. She was everything I wasn't: bold, confrontational, and completely unimpressed by authority figures. She'd also despised Lauren from the moment they met, calling her a sociopathic Barbie doll with a law degree. "Please tell me you're calling to say you've finally decided to burn your family's house down," Harper answered on the first ring. "Not their house, Lauren's wedding." The pause that followed was pregnant with possibility. "I'm listening." I told her everything: the text message, the phone calls with my parents, the casual cruelty of their unanimous decision. Harper listened without interrupting, but I could practically hear her getting angrier with each detail. Those absolute bastards, she said when I finished. Your own parents, your own sister. Who does that? People who think I'm too pathetic to fight back. Well, they're about to learn otherwise. What do you need? That was Harper, no hesitation. No moral lectures about taking the high road. Just instant, unwavering loyalty and a willingness to help me wage war. I need to know everything about this wedding. Guest list, timeline, vendor details, security arrangements, everything. And I need to know Lauren's secrets, the real ones, not just the social media version. Consider it done. I still have contacts at Georgetown, and Chicago's legal community is smaller than you'd think. Give me 48 hours. While Harper worked her network, I focused on the public information. Lauren's engagement announcement in the Chicago Tribune gave me names and connections. Richard Wellington III's law firm had a website with partner biographies and case histories. The Wellington Family Foundation had annual reports listing major donors and board members. I was building a map of their world, identifying pressure points and vulnerabilities. By Saturday afternoon, Harper called back with a preliminary report that exceeded my wildest expectations. First, the guest list, she said without preamble. 300 people, including 2 federal judges, a handful of congressmen, the mayor of Chicago, and approximately half of the city's top law firms. Richard's father is apparently positioning himself for a gubernatorial run next cycle, so this wedding is basically a campaign event disguised as a celebration. My heart started racing. This wasn't just a family wedding, it was a political gathering of Illinois' power elite. But here's where it gets interesting, Harper continued. I talked to my friend Jessica, who works at Morrison. Klein and Associates, that's the firm where Lauren landed her dream job. Guess how she got hired? Her sparkling personality. She lied on her application. Specifically, she claimed to have co-authored a law review article that she had absolutely nothing to do with. The real author was a guy named David Park, who graduated 2 years ahead of her. He's furious about it, but hasn't said anything publicly because he doesn't want to get involved in firm politics. I nearly dropped the phone. She stole credit for someone else's work. Gets better. She's also been inflating her billable hours and claiming credit for client development that was actually done by junior associates. Jessica says the partners are starting to notice, but they haven't acted on it yet because Lauren's engagement to Richard makes her basically untouchable. Holy shit! Oh, we're just getting started. I also found out that the wedding's being filmed for some Chicago Society magazine feature, professional videographers, the whole 9 yards. Lauren apparently wants this documented for posterity. Perfect. If Lauren wanted her wedding filmed, I'd make sure it was a documentary she'd never want anyone to see. What about security? Standard venue security plus some off-duty Chicago cops that Richard's family hired. Nothing too intense, they're more worried about paparazzi than actual threats. And the timeline. Ceremony at 4 p.m., cocktail hour at 5:30, reception starts at 7, dancing until midnight. Very traditional, very predictable. I spent the rest of the weekend refining my plan. The beauty of it was its simplicity. I wasn't going to sneak in through the kitchen or disguise myself as a caterer. I was going to walk through the front door like I belonged there, because in truth, I did belong there. I was the bride's sister, and despite their best efforts, they couldn't change that fact. The key was timing. I couldn't strike too early or I'd be removed before the real damage was done. But I couldn't wait too long either, or the evening would be over before I made my point. 7:15 p.m., right after the reception dinner, when the speeches were supposed to begin. That's when I'd make my entrance and deliver a speech of my own. But first, I needed more ammunition. Harper, I need you to get me everything you can on Lauren's academic history, her job performance, and anything else that might be illuminating. Also, can you find out who David Park is and how to contact him? Already on it. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that if Lauren wants to build her perfect new life on a foundation of lies, someone should point out how unstable that foundation really is. You magnificent, vengeful bitch. I love you. Monday morning, I went back to work like nothing had changed. I filed documents, answered emails, and had pleasant conversations with my coworkers about weekend plans. But underneath the normal routine, I was planning the systematic destruction of my sister's reputation. By Wednesday, Harper had sent me a file that was better than Christmas morning. David Park wasn't just angry about Lauren stealing credit for his work. He was documenting a pattern of academic and professional fraud that went back to her undergraduate years. He'd been building a case but hadn't known what to do with it. "He's willing to go on record," Harper told me during our evening call. "Apparently, Lauren screwed over a lot of people on her way up, and he's tired of watching her get rewarded for it." "What about the firm? Any more details on her billing issues?" "Jessica says it's worse than we thought. Lauren's been systematically claiming credit for work done by associates who are too junior to challenge her. The partners might overlook the plagiarism, but stealing billable hours is a fireable offense. They just need someone to force their hand." I smiled for the first time in a week. "I think I can arrange that." The final piece fell into place on Thursday when Harper sent me the wedding's detailed schedule, complete with vendor timelines and media coverage plans. Lauren had outdone herself. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a carefully orchestrated PR event designed to launch Richard's political career and cement Lauren's position in Chicago society, which made it the perfect target for maximum destruction. I booked a hotel room in Lake Forest for the weekend, a small bed and breakfast about 10 minutes from Rosecliff Manor. When they asked for the reason for my visit, I told them I was in town for a family celebration. It wasn't a lie. I was about to give my family a celebration they'd remember for the rest of their lives. The evidence arrived on Friday morning in a manila envelope that Harper had overnight shipped from Atlanta. Inside were printed emails, billing records, and academic documents that painted a picture of systematic fraud spanning Lauren's entire career. David Park had been thorough, obsessively so. Every stolen credit, every inflated hour, every lie Lauren had told was documented with timestamps and supporting evidence. But the centerpiece was a recorded phone conversation between Lauren and a junior associate named Marcus Thompson, where she explicitly instructed him to bill his hours under her name for a major client presentation. Illinois was a one-party consent state for recordings, and Marcus had been smart enough to protect himself when he realized what Lauren was asking him to do. "She's been running this scam for over a year," Harper explained during our final planning call. "The junior associates were too scared to speak up because Lauren has connections with the partners. But Marcus is different. His father is a partner at a rival firm, so he's not vulnerable to retaliation." I spread the documents across my kitchen table like a general planning a battle. Each piece of evidence was a weapon, and I needed to deploy them for maximum impact. "What about the venue access? Any updates on security?" I called the manor pretending to be from the catering company with questions about setup. Security is minimal during the day. They're more concerned about controlling the guest list than preventing people from getting in. The real security doesn't start until 3 p.m. Perfect. I'd been worried about accessing the audiovisual equipment, but Harper had solved that problem too. "The AV setup is being handled by Premier Events Chicago. I know someone who knows someone who works there. For $500, he'll make sure there's a wireless access point set up that you can connect to from your phone." "You're a miracle worker." "I'm a woman scorned by proxy. There's a difference." The beauty of my plan was that I didn't need to sneak in or create elaborate disguises. I was going to use Lauren's own obsession with documentation against her. She'd arranged for professional videography specifically to capture her perfect day. I was just going to make sure the cameras captured everything. Saturday morning, I drove to Lake Forest and checked into the Willowbrook Inn, a charming bed and breakfast that felt like stepping into a Norman Rockwell painting. The elderly proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, was delighted to have a guest attending that lovely Wellington wedding. "Such a beautiful family," she gushed while showing me to my room. "The bride's mother came by last week to look at our gardens for photos. Absolutely charming woman." I smiled and nodded, playing the role of proud family member. If only she knew what was coming. I spent the afternoon in careful preparation. Harper had coached me on the technical aspects, how to connect to the wireless network, how to upload files to the venue's presentation system, how to trigger the displays remotely. But the psychological preparation was something I had to do alone. I rehearsed my speech in the mirror, watching my face transform from the uncertain, apologetic expression I'd worn my entire life into something harder and more confident. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about truth. For once in my life, I was going to tell the truth about Lauren in front of people who mattered. The speech itself was only 3 minutes long, but those 3 minutes would destroy everything Lauren had built. At 3:30 p.m., I put on the outfit I'd chosen carefully, a simple black dress that could pass for funeral attire or cocktail wear, depending on your perspective. Conservative enough to blend in, memorable enough to make an impact. I looked like exactly what I was, the family member they'd tried to erase. The drive to Rosecliff Manor took 12 minutes. I parked in the guest lot, took a deep breath, and walked toward the main entrance like I owned the place. The venue was everything Lauren had bragged about: manicured gardens, elegant stonework, and the kind of understated luxury that screamed old money. Staff members were rushing around with final preparations, too busy to question a well-dressed woman walking confidently through the grounds. I found the main ballroom and quickly located the AV control station, exactly where Harper's contact had said it would be. The wireless network appeared on my phone immediately. Rosecliff Ave guest, password, Wellington 2024. My heart was pounding as I connected to the network and uploaded the files I'd prepared: photos of the forged documents, audio clips from Marcus's recording, and a presentation that laid out Lauren's history of fraud in stark, undeniable detail. The beautiful part was that I didn't have to time anything manually. The presentation system was already programmed to display a congratulatory slideshow during the reception dinner. I simply replaced their celebration montage with my truth-telling documentary. By 4:15 p.m., I was positioned in the garden area near the ceremony space, close enough to see but far enough away to avoid immediate recognition. The guests were arriving in waves, expensive cars dropping off expensively dressed people who moved with the casual confidence of those accustomed to power. I recognized several faces from newspaper photos and political coverage: federal judges, state legislators, business leaders whose decisions affected thousands of lives. These were Lauren's important people, the ones I wasn't fit to breathe the same air as. At exactly 4:30 p.m., the ceremony began. Lauren looked radiant in a dress that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, walking down the aisle toward Richard, who stood waiting in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. My parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a stab of the old pain. This should have been a joyful family moment. I should have been sitting with them, crying happy tears and celebrating my sister's new beginning. But then Lauren reached the altar, and I heard her voice carrying on the evening breeze as she spoke her vows about honesty, integrity, and building a life based on truth and trust. The irony was too perfect. The ceremony lasted 25 minutes. Afterward, the guests moved to the cocktail area while the wedding party posed for photos. I watched from my hidden position as Lauren laughed and posed, the picture of innocent joy. She had no idea what was coming. At 6:45 p.m., I made my way to the main ballroom. The reception was in full swing. Guests were seated at elegantly appointed tables. Dinner was being served, and the atmosphere was exactly as Lauren had envisioned: sophisticated, exclusive, and flawlessly executed. I took a seat at an empty table near the back, keeping my head down and checking my phone. The presentation was cued and ready. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. At 7:10 p.m., Richard's father stood up to give the first toast. He spoke eloquently about family, tradition, and the bright future that lay ahead for the happy couple. The crowd applauded warmly. Then it was time for the bride and groom to say a few words. Lauren stood up, radiant and confident, holding a champagne flute and preparing to address her adoring audience. This was her moment, the culmination of everything she'd worked for, the perfect launch for her perfect life. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "Richard and I are so grateful to celebrate with the people who matter most to us." I pulled out my phone and opened the presentation control app. This day represents not just our love for each other, but our commitment to building something lasting and true. My finger hovered over the Start Presentation button. "Sir, based on honesty, integrity, and the values our families have taught us." I pressed the button. The large screens around the ballroom, which had been displaying romantic photos of Lauren and Richard, suddenly switched to a new image, a scanned document with Lauren's forged signature claiming credit for David Park's law review article. The murmur that went through the crowd was immediate and electric. The night before the wedding, I lay awake in my bed at the Willowbrook Inn, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with emotions I couldn't name. The room was perfect antique furniture, lace curtains, the kind of quaint charm that Lauren would have photographed endlessly for her Instagram stories. But all I could think about was the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. At 2:30, I gave up on sleep and sat by the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens. My laptop was open beside me, displaying the presentation that would destroy my sister's life in less than 18 hours. The evidence was overwhelming. The plan was flawless. And tomorrow night, Lauren's perfect wedding would become her worst nightmare. So why did I feel like I was about to commit murder? Harper called at 7 her voice bright with anticipation. "D-Day, baby. How are you feeling?" "Terrified," I admitted. "Good. That means you're taking this seriously. But Maddie, you know this is the right thing to do, don't you? She's been destroying people's careers for years. You're not just getting revenge, you're protecting everyone else she would have hurt." I knew Harper was right, but that didn't make the weight in my chest any lighter. There was a part of me, a pathetic, desperate part, that still hoped Lauren might call at the last minute. Maybe she'd realize what she'd done, apologize, and invite me back into the family fold. But Lauren didn't call. Instead, I spent the morning scrolling through her social media posts from the previous day. Photos of her getting her nails done, videos of the rehearsal dinner, stories about feeling so blessed to marry my best friend surrounded by all the people who matter most. All the people who matter most. The knife twisted a little deeper with each post. At 11 a.m., I drove past Rosecliff Manor to do one final reconnaissance. The venue was bustling with activity florists arranging centerpieces, caterers setting up the kitchen, photographers testing lighting angles. Everything was proceeding exactly as Lauren had planned. I parked across the street and watched the controlled chaos, feeling like a sniper studying her target. In a few hours, all of this careful preparation would crumble into disaster, and it would be entirely my fault. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Madeline, this is David Park. Harper Williams gave me your number. I wanted to say thank you for what you're doing tonight. Lauren destroyed my reputation and nearly cost me my career. She deserves everything that's coming to her." I stared at the message for a long moment. David Park, the real author of the law review article Lauren had stolen credit for. I'd been thinking of him as an abstract victim, but he was a real person whose life Lauren had damaged for her own advancement. That helped. Focusing on Lauren's other victims made this feel less like family destruction and more like justice. At 12:30 p.m., I drove back to the inn and tried to eat lunch, but everything tasted like cardboard. Mrs. Henderson fussed over me, commenting that I seemed nervous about the wedding. "Family celebrations can be so emotional," she said kindly. "I'm sure it'll be beautiful." "I'm sure it will be," I agreed. At 2 p.m., I began getting ready with the methodical precision of a soldier preparing for battle. The black dress fit perfectly somber enough for a funeral, elegant enough for a society wedding. I chose minimal jewelry and understated makeup. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, the forgotten family member who'd been cast aside. My hands were shaking as I applied lipstick, and I had to redo it twice. Harper called at 3:15 p.m. for a final check-in. "You don't have to do this," she said suddenly. "If you're having second thoughts, we can call it off." You could just drive home and pretend none of this ever happened. The offer was tempting. I could pack up my evidence, delete the presentation, and spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to fight back. No, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I'm tired of pretending things are fine when they're not. I'm tired of being the family disappointment who's supposed to stay quiet and grateful for whatever scraps they throw me. That's my girl. Remember, you're not the villain here. You're just the only one brave enough to tell the truth. At 4 p.m., I could hear the church bells ringing in the distance, marking the start of Lauren's ceremony. I imagined her walking down the aisle in her perfect dress, surrounded by 300 of Chicago's most influential people, basking in the admiration and approval she'd always craved. Enjoy it while it lasts, I thought. At 5:30 p.m., I drove to Rosecliff Manor for the final time. The parking lot was full of luxury cars, BMWs, Mercedes, a few Teslas that screamed new money trying to fit in with old money. I found a space near the back and sat in my car for 10 minutes, gathering my courage. Through the windows of the main ballroom, I could see the cocktail reception in full swing. Guests mingled with drinks in hand, everyone perfectly dressed and perfectly behaved. Lauren was visible near the center of the crowd, glowing with happiness and surrounded by well-wishers. She looked beautiful. She looked victorious. She looked like someone who'd never doubted for a second that she deserved every bit of attention and admiration she was receiving. In a few hours, that confidence would be shattered forever. I checked my phone one more time. The presentation was loaded and ready. The wireless connection was stable. Everything was in place. At 6:45 p.m., I walked through the front doors of Rosecliff Manor like I belonged there. The staff was too busy with dinner service to question a well-dressed woman moving confidently through the venue. A few guests glanced at me curiously, but no one approached or challenged my presence. I found my seat at the back of the ballroom and watched as dinner was served with military precision. Lauren and Richard sat at the head table, looking like the golden couple they'd always been destined to become. My parents flanked them, beaming with pride at their perfect daughter's perfect evening. Nobody noticed the woman in black sitting alone in the shadows, holding a phone that contained enough explosive information to destroy everything they'd built. At 7:10 p.m., the toasts began. Richard's father spoke eloquently about tradition and family legacy. My father raised his glass to the most wonderful daughter-in-law we could have asked for. Everyone applauded enthusiastically. Then Lauren stood up to give her speech. Thank you all for being here tonight, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Richard and I are so grateful to celebrate with the people who matter most to us. The people who matter most. I thought about my empty apartment, about spending the evening alone while my entire family celebrated without me. My finger found the presentation button on my phone. This day represents not just our love for each other, but our commitment to building something lasting and true, based on honesty, integrity, and the values our families have taught us. Honesty, integrity, values. I pressed the button, and Lauren's perfect world began to crumble. The first document appeared on the screens with crystalline clarity, Lauren's forged signature claiming authorship of David Park's law review article. The murmur that rippled through the ballroom was immediate and electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Lauren's champagne flute froze halfway to her lips. Her eyes darted to the screens, then swept the room in growing panic as 300 of Chicago's most powerful people stared at evidence of her academic fraud. "What is this?" she whispered into the microphone, her voice cracking. The presentation advanced automatically. The next slide showed billing records from Morrison, Klein and Associates hours Lauren had claimed but never worked, client meetings she'd never attended, research she'd never conducted. The timestamps were damning, the evidence irrefutable. Richard's father shot to his feet, his face dark with rage. "Someone stop this immediately!" But the venue staff was as stunned as everyone else. The presentation system was locked into automatic mode, and my careful programming ensured it couldn't be stopped without a complete system shutdown that would take several minutes. The third slide was the audio file. Marcus Thompson's recorded conversation with Lauren played through the ballroom's sound system with perfect clarity. "Lauren, I can't put these hours under your name. I did this work." "Marcus, sweetie, you're new here. This is how things work. The client relationship is mine, so the credit goes to me." "But that's fraud." "It's business. If you want to succeed at this firm, you need to understand how the game is played." The silence that followed was deafening. 300 people sat frozen in their chairs, absorbing the implications of what they'd just heard. Federal judges, state legislators, business leaders all witnessing Lauren's systematic destruction of junior colleagues' careers. I stood up slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every eye in the room turned toward me as I made my way from the back of the ballroom toward the head table. My legs felt like water, but my voice was steady when I spoke. "Hello, Lauren." She stared at me like I was a ghost, which, in a way, I was. The ghost of the sister she'd tried to erase. "You," she breathed. "You did this." "I did." I kept walking, my black dress a stark contrast to the glittering gowns around me. "You said I wasn't socially fit for your wedding. You said I would embarrass the family." I gestured toward the screens, which were now displaying a comprehensive timeline of Lauren's fraudulent activities. "How do you feel about embarrassment now?" Richard was on his feet, his face purple with fury. "Security, get her out of here." But the security guards were paralyzed by confusion. Technically, I hadn't done anything illegal. I was simply presenting documentation of crimes Lauren had committed. The real question was whether they should be arresting me or her. My mother's voice cut through the chaos. "Madeline, stop this immediately." I turned toward my parents, who sat frozen at the head table like deer in headlights. "Stop what, Mom? Telling the truth. Isn't that one of those family values you're always talking about?" Dad stood up slowly, his diplomatic training kicking in even as his world collapsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption." "Don't apologize for me," I interrupted. "I'm not the one who's been stealing credit from junior associates. I'm not the one who built her entire career on lies." I looked directly at Lauren, who was clutching Richard's arm like a lifeline. "I'm just the one who finally decided to stop protecting you from the consequences of your actions." The presentation was still running, now showing Lauren's undergraduate transcripts with clear evidence of plagiarism dating back to her sophomore year, a pattern of fraud spanning nearly a decade, all meticulously documented. "This is insane," Lauren said, her voice rising to near hysteria. "She's my sister. She's jealous. She's always been jealous." "I was never jealous of your success," I said quietly. "I was jealous of your relationship with our parents, your confidence, your ability to move through the world like you belonged in it. But I was never jealous of your willingness to destroy other people to get what you wanted." Richard's mother, a formidable woman who chaired half the charity boards in Chicago, stood up with icy composure. "Richard, we're leaving. Immediately." "Mrs. Wellington, please," Lauren started. "Don't!" The older woman's voice could have frozen Lake Michigan. "My family has spent 3 generations building our reputation in this city. I will not watch it destroyed by association with a common criminal." That word criminal hung in the air like a death sentence. Several tables of guests were already gathering their things, murmuring apologies as they headed for the exits. The federal judges looked particularly uncomfortable. Being associated with documented fraud wasn't exactly career-enhancing for members of the judiciary. Lauren tried one last desperate gambit. "Please, everyone, don't listen to her. She's been struggling with mental health issues." "Our mental health issues." I laughed, and the sound was harder than I'd ever heard from my own voice. "Is that what we're calling inconvenient truths now?" I turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, everything you've seen tonight is documented and verifiable. David Park, who whose work Lauren stole, is willing to testify. Marcus Thompson, whose hours she claimed, has recordings of multiple conversations. The partners at Morrison, Klein and Associates have been investigating billing irregularities for months. I paused, letting that sink in. The only mental health issue here is Lauren's apparent inability to distinguish between what she's earned and what she's stolen. The room was emptying rapidly now. Politicians fled like rats from a sinking ship, unwilling to be photographed at an event that would be front-page news tomorrow. Business leaders made hasty exits, already calculating the damage to their own reputations from being associated with this disaster. Richard stood at the head table, his political future crumbling in real time. His father was already on the phone, probably with crisis management specialists. His mother had the look of someone mentally revising guest lists to exclude anyone named Carter. "Madeline," my father said, his voice heavy with defeat. "What have you done?" "I've told the truth," I said simply. "Something this family seems to have forgotten how to do." Lauren was crying now, her perfect makeup running in black streaks down her cheeks. Her wedding dress, which had looked so ethereal an hour ago, now seemed like a costume from a play that had ended badly. "You've destroyed everything," she sobbed. "My marriage, my career, my life." "No," I said firmly. "You destroyed those things when you decided that lying and cheating were acceptable ways to get what you wanted. I just made sure everyone else knew about it." The ballroom was nearly empty now, littered with abandoned champagne glasses and wedding favors that no one wanted to take home. The professional videographers Lauren had hired were still filming, but this definitely wasn't the documentary she'd envisioned. I looked around at the devastation, at my sister crying in her ruined dress, at my parents sitting in stunned silence, at Richard staring at his phone as his political aspirations died in real time. For 29 years, I'd been the family disappointment, the awkward daughter who couldn't quite measure up, who was always one social misstep away from embarrassing everyone. Tonight, I'd finally lived up to their expectations. And it felt absolutely perfect. I walked out of Rosecliff Manor at 8:23 p.m., leaving behind a scene that would be dissected in Chicago society circles for years to come. The evening air was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere I'd just escaped. Behind me, the sounds of chaos continued, raised voices, car doors slamming, the desperate conversations of people trying to distance themselves from a scandal. The parking lot was a symphony of hasty departures. Luxury cars peeled out with undignified speed as Illinois' power elite fled the scene like it was a crime site, which, in many ways, it was. I sat in my rental car for a moment, engine running, and watched the last stragglers emerge from the venue. Richard's family swept past in a convoy of black SUVs, their faces grim behind tinted windows. A few brave souls lingered near the entrance, probably reporters who'd gotten wind of the story and rushed over to document the aftermath. My phone was buzzing with notifications, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, text messages from distant relatives who'd somehow heard the news, and one message from Harper that simply read, "You magnificent savage, call me when you're ready to celebrate." But I wasn't ready to celebrate yet. I needed to process what had just happened, to understand what I'd unleashed and what it meant for the rest of my life. The drive back to the Willowbrook Inn took 15 minutes through quiet suburban streets lined with oak trees and perfectly manicured lawns. This was the world Lauren had been so desperate to join old money respectability, where reputation mattered more than truth and appearances trumped authenticity. Well, she'd certainly made an impression tonight. Mrs. Henderson was waiting in the lobby when I arrived, her face creased with concern. "Oh, my dear, you look exhausted. How was the wedding?" "Unforgettable," I said truthfully. She didn't press for details, probably sensing that I wasn't in the mood for conversation. I climbed the stairs to my room, kicked off my heels, and collapsed onto the antique bed that had seemed so charming 12 hours earlier. My phone rang immediately. Harper, of course. "Tell me everything," she demanded without preamble. I gave her the full rundown. From the moment the first document appeared on screen to my final confrontation with Lauren, Harper listened without interrupting, but I could practically hear her grinning through the phone. Jesus Christ, Maddie, you actually did it. You really brought down the whole house of cards. I did. The reality was still sinking in. Harper, I think I just destroyed my entire family. You didn't destroy anything that wasn't already rotten. Lauren built her life on lies. Your parents enabled her, and they all treated you like garbage. Sometimes things need to be destroyed before they can be rebuilt properly. Maybe she was right. But sitting alone in a strange hotel room, watching my phone light up with increasingly frantic messages from family members, I felt the weight of what I'd done settling over me like a heavy blanket. Around 10:30 p.m., my mother called. I stared at her name on my screen for a long time before answering. Madeline. Her voice was hollow, stripped of its usual diplomatic warmth. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've exposed the truth about Lauren's career, something you should have done years ago. The Wellington family has completely severed ties with us. Richard's father is already talking to lawyers about annulment proceedings. Lauren's job is in jeopardy. The family reputation is finally accurate. I finished. For once in our lives, people see us exactly as we are instead of the perfect image you've all been projecting. There was a long pause. Where are you? That doesn't matter anymore. Madeline, please, come home. We can work through this as a family. I almost laughed. Now you want to work through things as a family when it's convenient for you, when you need damage control. I took a deep breath. Mom, you made it very clear that I'm not socially fit to be part of this family. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted. I hung up before she could respond. The next morning, I checked out of the inn and drove home to Arlington. The story had already hit the Chicago Tribune's website, Society Wedding Erupts in Fraud Scandal. By evening, it would be picked up by national news outlets. Lauren's carefully constructed life was unraveling in real time, broadcast to the world. Back in my apartment, surrounded by my books and my quiet, honest life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness, exactly, but a deep sense of rightness. For the first time in my life, I'd refused to be the family's designated victim. My phone kept ringing reporters, distant relatives, old college friends who'd seen the news. I ignored them all. This wasn't about publicity or vindication. It was about finally, after 29 years, refusing to accept a role I'd never auditioned for. 3 days later, Harper flew in from Atlanta. We sat in my living room with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine, processing the aftermath. Any regrets? She asked. I considered the question seriously. Lauren's engagement was over. Her career was in ruins. My parents weren't speaking to me. The family I'd grown up with had essentially ceased to exist. No, I said finally. I spent my whole life being ashamed of who I was, trying to become someone they could accept. But they were never going to accept me. Harper. I was always going to be the disappointment, the embarrassment, the sister who wasn't quite good enough. And now I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to show up to family dinners and smile while Lauren subtly tears me down. I don't have to listen to my parents explain why I'm not invited to important events. I'm free. A week later, I got a letter from David Park. Lauren had been fired from Morrison, Klein and Associates. The firm was conducting a full audit of her work, and several other instances of fraud had come to light. Criminal charges were being considered. I felt a twinge of something not guilt, exactly, but recognition of the magnitude of what I'd set in motion. Lauren's life as she'd known it was over. But then I thought about all the junior associates she'd cheated, all the people whose work she'd stolen, all the victims who'd stayed silent because they were too afraid or too powerless to fight back. Sometimes the truth is devastating, but that doesn't make it less necessary. 6 months later, I was promoted to senior archivist at the Arlington Research Institute. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was important work. And it was mine. I'd found my place in the world not in my family's spotlight, but in my own quiet corner where truth mattered more than appearance and competence mattered more than connections. I never saw Lauren again, but sometimes, late at night, I wondered if she'd learned anything from her spectacular fall. I wondered if she ever thought about the junior associates whose careers she'd damaged, or if she still saw herself as the victim in this story. Mostly, though, I didn't think about her at all. I'd spent too many years letting Lauren's shadow define my life. Now I was finally living in my own sunlight. And it was exactly as warm and bright as I'd always imagined it would be. Thank you for listening to this story of family betrayal, revenge, and ultimately, liberation. I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what you thought about Madeline's journey from family disappointment to fierce truth teller. Please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and let me know if you've ever had to make the difficult choice between family loyalty and personal integrity. Your stories and perspectives help build this community of listeners who understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when it comes from the people closest to you.